I didn't scream. I didn't fall apart. I just stood in my kitchen holding that phone long after the call ended, staring at the frost creeping up the window like it had somewhere to be. My son had been buried 4 days earlier. The ground in Sudbury was frozen solid in late January, and the men from the funeral home had to bring in special equipment. I remember thinking that even the earth didn't want to let him go. His name was Daniel, 41 years old, a healthy man who ran half marathons and took his vitamins and called me every Sunday morning without fail. And then one morning he didn't call. And by the time I drove the 2 hours from my place in Barrie to his apartment in Ottawa, his wife was already on the phone with the police. They said it was cardiac arrest. They said sometimes it just happens. Young men, healthy men, no warning. It happens. I didn't believe it then. I don't believe it now. But I'm getting ahead of myself. The call I'm talking about, the one that changed everything, that came from his building superintendent, a man named Walt, 60-some years old, worked that building on Lisgar Street for nearly 15 years. Daniel had known him well, used to help Walt haul furniture for tenants when the elevator was out. Walt came to the funeral, stood in the back and didn't say much. I noticed him because he kept looking at my son-in-law the whole time with an expression I couldn't name. 4 days later, Walt called me. "Mrs. Auger," he said, "I need you to come to the building. There's something you have to see. And please, don't bring your son-in-law." I asked him why. He just said, "Please come alone." I drove to Ottawa the next morning. 4 hours on the 400 because there was a transport accident past Barrie that backed everything up. I didn't mind. I had 4 hours to sit with what Walt might have found, and none of the answers made me feel any better. Daniel had rented that apartment for 6 years. After he married, his wife moved in, but it was always his place, his name on the lease. He paid his rent on time, never complained, fixed small things himself rather than putting in maintenance requests. Walt had told me all of this at the reception after the funeral, quietly, like he was building a case for what a good person my son was. At the time, I thought he was just being kind. Now I wondered if he was preparing me. When I arrived, Walt met me in the lobby. He was a big man, broad-shouldered, the kind of man who looks like he's never been nervous a day in his life. But that morning his hands weren't steady. He took me up to Daniel's apartment. My daughter-in-law was staying with her parents in Canada by then. The apartment was still full of Daniel's things, and he walked straight to the bedroom closet. High shelf, pushed to the back behind a box of old hockey cards. He reached up and pulled down a laptop. "I found it 2 days after he passed," Walt said. "I came in to check the pipes. The heat had been off. I was worried about the bathroom, and I saw the closet door was open and that box had fallen halfway off the shelf. I went to put it back, and that's when I saw it. It was one of those small laptops, a personal one, nothing special. But it had a sticky note on the lid in my son's handwriting. 2 words, for Mom." I sat down on the edge of Daniel's bed and I couldn't move for a moment. Walt said, "I didn't open it. I don't know the password, but I thought you should have it before anyone else knew it was here." I looked at him. Why before anyone else? Walt pressed his lips together. "Because about 3 weeks before Daniel passed, I saw your son-in-law in this hallway when Daniel wasn't home. He said he forgot his key, said he needed to get something. I let him in. He spent maybe 20 minutes up here alone." Walt looked at the floor. "I've been thinking about that ever since. I shouldn't have let him in without Daniel there. I'm sorry." I took the laptop home that night. I have a friend, a woman I've known since we both worked at the credit union in Barrie back in the 90s, long before she went on to become a forensic accountant, and I called her on the drive back. I told her I had something I needed her help with. She didn't ask questions. That's why she's been my friend for 30 years. She came over the next evening, and within an hour she had the laptop open. The password was my birthday. Month, day, year, no spaces. I had to go sit by the back window when she told me that. What was on that laptop took us most of the night to go through. Daniel had been keeping a record. A careful, methodical, patient record that started 14 months before he died. Spreadsheets, screenshots, emails he had forwarded to himself from a private account, a folder of PDF documents, and a long, single-spaced document he had titled simply Timeline. My son had worked for 8 years as a project manager at a mid-sized construction firm in Ottawa. His son-in-law, my daughter-in-law's brother, a man I will call by what he was, which is a thief, had joined the company 3 years earlier. Daniel had brought him in, had vouched for him, had told his own boss personally that this man was trustworthy. What my son discovered, slowly and then all at once, was that his brother-in-law had been systematically overbilling subcontractors, pocketing the difference, and running the money through a numbered company registered in Alberta. It had been going on for nearly 2 years. The total, by the time Daniel had finished his accounting, was somewhere just above $340,000. I read that number 3 times. Daniel had gone to a lawyer. Not the company's lawyer, his own, a woman he'd found through the Law Society referral service, someone who had no connection to anyone in his life. He'd had 2 consultations. There were notes in the laptop about what she had advised. Document everything. Don't confront. Bring it to the company's board of directors with evidence in hand. Consider whether to involve the RCMP or let the company decide. She had told him the process would take time and that he needed to be patient. He had been patient. What he had not been was safe. The timeline document went right up to 3 weeks before he died. The last entry was a Tuesday. It said, "He knows I know. I could tell by the way he looked at me at dinner on Sunday. I need to move faster. Calling Sandra's office tomorrow morning." Sandra was the lawyer's first name. There was no entry after that. My friend sat across the table from me at 2 a.m, and neither of us spoke for a long time. Outside, Barrie was quiet and cold, and the street light through the window made everything look pale and flat. "You need to take this to someone," she said finally. "I know. Doc Captain." "Not the company, not the family, someone official." "I know. Doc Captain. And you need to make copies, right now, tonight. Multiple copies, different locations." We made 4 copies that night. One on a USB key that I put in my safety deposit box at the TD branch on Dunlop Street the next morning. One emailed to my friend's personal account. One printed, every page, and put in a manila envelope in my filing cabinet. And the original laptop, which I gave to my friend to keep at her home. I want to be clear about something. I am 67 years old. I was a credit union branch manager for 19 years. I have sat across from people in difficult financial situations my entire adult working life, and I know exactly what documentation looks like, and I know exactly what it means when the numbers don't add up. My son built something solid. He had receipts, comparables, the numbered company registration, wire transfer records, emails where his brother-in-law had been careless enough to put things in writing. Daniel had done this right. What I did next, I want to be honest about. I made a mistake. I called my son-in-law not to confront him. I want to be clear about that. I called him because I still didn't fully believe what I was looking at, and I don't know what I thought. Maybe I thought if I heard his voice I would know. I have known that man for 9 years. He sat at my table at Christmas. He helped Daniel move a couch up 3 flights of stairs. And now I was looking at a spreadsheet that said he may have had reason to want my son dead before my son could bring evidence to a board of directors. He answered on the second ring, and his voice was exactly the same as it always was. Easy. Warm. He asked how I was holding up. He said he missed Daniel too. He said my daughter-in-law was doing better, eating a little more, sleeping. I said in the dark, and when they called her, I said, without planning to, Daniel was so organized, wasn't he? He kept records of everything. There was a pause, very short, the kind of pause most people wouldn't notice. Yeah, he said. He was thorough, that's for sure. I got off the phone and I sat in my kitchen and I understood that I had just told him something without meaning to. 3 days later, my daughter-in-law called me. She said her husband wanted to come see me. He had something he wanted to discuss. He said it was about Daniel's estate. Some paperwork that needed attention. My daughter-in-law's name is on a joint bank account that Daniel had intended to leave in a will that hadn't been finalized before he died. And he knew I was the executor of Daniel's estate, appointed by an older will from when Daniel was still single. I called my friend. I called Sandra, the lawyer, who agreed to speak with me after I explained the situation. I called my neighbor's son, who is a retired OPP officer, and I asked him to come sit in my kitchen during the visit and to stay in the back room where he wouldn't be seen. I also set my phone on the kitchen counter, screen down, voice memo recording. He arrived on a Wednesday afternoon in February, parked his car on the street, walked up my front path, rang the bell like a man who had nothing to worry about. He was wearing a blue jacket I recognized. I made tea. He started with small things. How was I sleeping? Had I been eating? The usual. And then he circled around to the estate. He said there might be some confusion about the joint account and whether the funds transferred automatically or whether they were subject to probate. He was wondering, he said, if I had found any documentation at Daniel's apartment, any records Daniel might have kept. I said I wasn't sure. I said Daniel had been organized, but I hadn't been through everything yet. He nodded slowly. And then he said something I will never forget. He said, I just want to make sure the right things get to the right people. Some things shouldn't go to the lawyers if we can handle it in the family. I looked at him across my kitchen table. I thought about my son. I thought about that sticky note on the laptop. For Mom. I said, and I think we should let the lawyers handle everything. His expression didn't change, but something behind his eyes did. He left 20 minutes later. My neighbor's son came out of the back room, and we stood in my kitchen and listened to the recording together. It wasn't a confession. It wasn't anything that would hold up on its own. But it was a man asking a dead man's mother whether she had found documentation, and it was on tape, and it existed now alongside everything else on that laptop. I took everything to the RCMP. I want to say it was simple from there, but it wasn't. It took 3 months before anyone used the word investigation out loud to me. It took another 2 months after that before there were any consequences. My daughter-in-law stopped speaking to me. My son-in-law's family, people I had known for nearly a decade, disappeared from my life like they had never been in it. There was no dramatic arrest in my living room. There was a phone call from the RCMP officer assigned to the case, a young woman from the Financial Crimes Unit, who told me carefully that charges had been laid. Fraud over $5,000. Breach of trust. The company had been involved by then, had done their own internal audit, and the number had grown. It was closer to $410,000 by the time they were finished. The question of Daniel's death, whether it was truly cardiac arrest, whether something was done to him, that investigation is ongoing. I'm not allowed to say more than that. What I can say is that the medical examiner was asked to review the case file and that a second opinion was sought. I don't know yet what the answer will be. I think about Daniel every morning when I wake up. I make coffee and I look out at my backyard and I think about the fact that he hid that laptop for me on purpose. He knew. He knew something might happen to him, and his first thought was to leave a trail that I would find. He trusted me with it. a 67-year-old retired credit union manager living alone in Barrie, Ontario. He thought I could handle it. I hope I have. If your gut is telling you something is wrong, it is not grief. It is not age. It is not you being dramatic or difficult or impossible to deal with. Mothers know. I don't care how many people tell you otherwise. You know your child, and you know when something doesn't fit, and you have every right to pull on that thread until you find out what it's attached to. Make copies of everything. Keep them in different places. Trust the people who have been in your life for 30 years. And if someone tells you to handle things in the family, ask yourself who benefits from that silence. Daniel would have been 42 this spring. He liked fishing and bad action movies and called me every Sunday morning. I still pick up the phone sometimes when it rings at 9 o'clock and feel, just for a second, that it might be him. It never is, but I keep the phone close anyway, because the next call might be the one that gives me the rest of the answers. And when it comes, I'll be ready. I keep coming back to that sticky note. 2 words in Daniel's handwriting. For Mom. He didn't write for the police or for the lawyers. He wrote my name, or the closest thing to it. And I think about what it takes for a person to sit alone with something that frightening, knowing what he knew, suspecting what he suspected, and still have the presence of mind to think, if something happens to me, she'll find it. She'll know what to do. That kind of clarity doesn't come from nowhere. Daniel earned it. He spent 14 months building that record quietly, carefully, without tipping his hand, without letting his fear make him careless. He could have confronted his brother-in-law at Sunday dinner. He could have sent an anonymous tip and hoped for the best. Instead, he documented everything, consulted a lawyer through the proper channels, and left a trail that was airtight. That was his intelligence working, not just book smarts, but the kind of disciplined thinking that knows the difference between reacting and responding. What undid the man who betrayed him was the opposite. Greed is loud, even when it thinks it's being quiet. $340,000 moved through a numbered company doesn't stay invisible forever. Emails written carelessly because you assume no one is watching, those exist. A building super who lets you into an apartment you have no business being in alone because you ask nicely, and then spends weeks replaying that decision. That man eventually picks up the phone. Actions accumulate. They always do. My son-in-law built something too over those 2 years. He just didn't realize what he was building. I think about my own role in all of this, and I'm not proud of every moment. I made that phone call I shouldn't have made. I gave him information I didn't mean to give. It was a moment of weakness dressed up as a gut check, and it cost me 3 days of fear wondering what he would do next. If I'm honest, that phone call came from a place of wanting to be wrong. I wanted to hear his voice and feel foolish for suspecting him. That's a very human thing to want. But it wasn't smart, and it wasn't fair to Daniel's memory, and I've had to sit with that. What I got right was the rest of it. I called my friend of 30 years, and I trusted her completely. I secured those copies before I did anything else. I let the lawyer and the RCMP do what they were trained to do rather than trying to force a confrontation that could have gone badly. I stayed steady when my daughter-in-law stopped answering my calls and her husband's family went silent. Staying steady when everything around you is shifting. That's not something that comes easy, but it's the only thing that works. If Daniel's story asks anything of the people who hear it, I think it asks this. Pay attention to the quiet voices. Not the dramatic ones, not the ones that demand your attention. The quiet ones, the ones that say something doesn't fit. Daniel listened to that voice for 14 months. Walt listened to it for 4 days before he called me. I listened to it on the drive to Ottawa when I couldn't quite explain why I was afraid. We don't always get to know the full ending before we have to act. I still don't know everything. The investigation is still open. There are answers I'm waiting on that I may not get for a long time, or ever. But I made the copies. I kept the laptop safe. I let the right people see the right evidence. Whatever comes next, Daniel left me something solid to stand on. That's all any of us can do, really. Do the right thing as carefully as you can, for as long as it takes, even when no one is watching. The rest has a way of following.